As video games were continuing to become more mainstream in the 80s and 90s, our favorite movies and TV shows began to cash in on this phenomenon with shows like Captain N the Game Master and films like The Wizard. But those aren't the type of productions that I want to discuss today because they were specifically centered around video games. I want to focus on those moments of, hey, what was that? And rewind that back, I need to see that again. I mean those moments of pure joy when you saw one of your favorite video games referenced on screen and it caught you by surprise. It made you smile, and you just had a lasting impression that you will always remember. And I wanted to share a few of mine with you today, so let's get started. And up first we have the 1987 fantasy film The Princess Bride. The opening scene starts with Fred Savage, sick in his bed at home, playing on a Commodore 64 Hardball, which is a baseball title that I think was released in '86 and was really popular, but I didn't really have it then. But it definitely drew me in that I saw a video game, and it definitely sticks with me. But the way they were setting it up, it actually makes it to where it's a boring video game and that there's no energy in the room. He's just slowly tapping the joystick and trying to play the game, and you can tell that the real energy changes when the grandpa enters and he has the book and the story that he's going to tell. So it was kind of a jab to video games, but to me it really is a lasting impression. I'll never forget Marty McFly exploring Hill Valley in what would be the year 2015 in Back to the Future Part 2. I mean, you had that Jaws 3D hologram, and if you didn't want a Mattel hoverboard back in the day when you watched this movie, there was something wrong with you. But not surprisingly, one of the elements that stick with me the most is when Marty goes over near that antique shop window, and you see all this stuff from the 80s, like they're now antiques. I mean, it definitely didn't predict what was going to be happening with all of us collecting this stuff in the future. But you can see in the window that there is a Jaws NES LJN box, so it's now considered an antique, and I guess something that would be worthy to put in a window and play. But yeah, I got so drawn in on the Jaws NES game that I overlooked other stuff in there, like there's a Roger Rabbit doll, and especially there was another NES cartridge, Burger Time, in there. But yeah, definitely never going to forget that. Do you remember how much hype there was around Ghostbusters 2 when it released in the late 80s? I mean, that movie was everywhere back then. And the equivalent of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from the first movie was the Statue of Liberty in Part 2. And of course, you know, I remember the most that they took control of the Statue of Liberty by spraying that mood slime and putting loudspeakers all throughout the inner workings of the statue to give it positive energy, to help control it, to help fight all the negative energy from the other ghosts. But of course, what they slapped down to use as the controller was an NES Advantage joystick that Ray had modified. I mean, as soon as they laid that down, I was like, yep, this movie is the best. That was such a big deal for me, and I'm sure it was for you too. This next one's actually closely related to The Princess Bride because it's also in the opening scene, and it's also a PC-based game that kind of draws you in at the beginning. And that is the Tom Hanks movie Big from 1988. It starts off where the lead character, Josh, is I think 13 years old, and he's playing a PC game, and it's this adventure text-based game that this hero is in this cavern with an ice wizard, and you have all these dead dwarfs surrounding it, and he has to input these text commands to try to destroy the wizard, and he can't figure it out at the first of the movie. But he does eventually figure out how to take down the wizard by the end of the movie. But it was one of those things that I was like, this game looks very interesting, there's a lot of drama with it. Is this a game that I can buy? I never remembered seeing it, and it's just one of those that always stayed in the back of your mind. And it turns out that it wasn't a real game, it was just something they made up specifically for the plot of the story, which I think is pretty cool. But apparently in recent years, people had made Flash versions of this game, and you can actually play it. Although it's just basically, you can enter the same things that he entered in the movie to win the game. But at least there was a playable Flash version, so I think that's pretty neat. And if you do happen to play the Flash game, a spoiler alert is you can take him out with a thermal pod. You're welcome. Up next is a clip from a Steve Martin movie, which I don't know if people really consider it a classic, but it's one I did like watching growing up, and that was from Parenthood. And it's just a small moment in the movie where Steve Martin is watching his son Kevin play the arcade game Bad Dudes. It's basically just an initial, you see a real close-up shot of Kevin playing the game, you actually see the game playing, you hear the sound effects that we all know, and Kevin quickly gets killed, and you can tell he's frustrated, and Steve Martin is just there for support and telling him it's okay, and he's like, well, it's okay that you lost, they're bad dudes, come on, they're bad dudes. So, I mean, it's great in the fact that I just got to see the Bad Dudes cabinet. I knew it was a real cabinet when I was little, so from that perspective, when I was young, that's what made it good. And what's very strange and further cemented it in my mind is that the theater that I watched it at, Bad Dudes was in their lobby, so that was pretty cool. But watching it back now as an adult, I appreciate it even more from a father's perspective, because you can tell it's just Steve Martin. He's not necessarily really interested in the game, and he's trying to relate to the video game and just support his son and try to have a little father-son time. So that's a great clip. And oddly enough, the next clip is from a Steve Martin movie too. It was one that I used to watch on HBO all the time because it just seemed to always be on once it got released there, and that was from the movie My Blue Heaven. Steve Martin plays a guy named Vinny who is in the witness protection program from the Mafia, but there's one scene where they go to this hotel where the agents are, and they're playing the NES, and you can see the NES on top of the TV screen, and you see just a little view of the screen, and they're actually playing Goonies 2 from the NES. But the sounds are from Pac-Man from the Atari 2600. But that one's definitely one of my favorites because it's such a small window that you can see that it's Goonies 2. A quick little honorable mention here is just one that I kind of vaguely remember as I was doing the video here, and that was a scene from Wayne's World where you have that Noah's Arcade guy that kind of tried to sponsor and take over Wayne's World there for a little bit with Rob Lowe, and I think it was Brian Doyle Murray who was Noah Vanderhoff, I think that was his name. I can't believe I remember this stuff. But he was the arcade owner. There was some split-second image that he's either doing a commercial or it's on a monitor or something, and you can see behind him that it's a level from Sonic the Hedgehog. And that's a quick little honorable mention for me that I may just throw in there. Now this final one was definitely the one that I remember the most, and it's on a show that my family watched pretty religiously, and the fact that it was an episode that was pretty much entirely centered around video games was pretty amazing. And that's the episode titled Backstory from Roseanne. It's called Backstory because Roseanne threw her back out, and Roseanne's mom is over to visit, and Roseanne's mom and Dan never get along, and she always tries to one-up him and stuff like that. And it's DJ, their son's 10th birthday, I think it's his 10th birthday coming up, and he wants a Super Nintendo. But Roseanne and Dan have been telling him, honey, we can't afford it, it's just not in the budget, we can't do it. I mean, he's not being a brat about it, but you can tell he's disappointed. But secretly, Dan had been saving up, and he already picked up a Super Nintendo. So they were going to give it to him at his birthday, and just about the time he was opening presents, Beverly, the grandmother, had secretly bought a Super Nintendo just to show up Dan, and he opened up Beverly's instead of Dan's. And you just felt so bad for Dan and Roseanne, and you definitely hated Beverly. It was just so great because that was actually the only time I can ever remember really rooting for DJ. Most of the time I didn't really like his character. And I'm not gonna lie, I was rooting for DJ a little more because I had a Sega Genesis then, and I was a little low-key jealous of the people that had the Super Nintendo, so I was definitely happy for DJ to get one. Let me know what you think about the list, and please share any cameos that I may have missed. Till next time, guys. G3 out.